Hello and welcome to the Commander's Quarters, your Magic the Gathering source that helps you command your budget. This show and episodes like this one are possible thanks to viewers like you. If you're looking for an easy way to help support this show, make sure that you like, share, and subscribe. Also, hit that bell notification icon so you don't miss any new episodes. You can also go check out our playmats and other merchandise at thecommandersquarters.com. Another easy way to support this show is with our TCG player affiliate links. So whether you're buying a deck or individual cards, you can use this general link right here or one in the description. And the final way that you can support this show is by supporting us directly by becoming a patron. There are many benefits to being a patron, and I truly couldn't do this without all their support. Hey everyone, Mitch coming in for the Commander's Quarters studio. Welcome to the show. So spoiler season continues on today, and so does the exciting and somewhat strange cards that we are seeing. Yesterday we saw the very first MDFC Sorcery Commander. That's right, you can have a sorcery in your command zone now. And then we also saw what is perhaps the weirdest commander of all time, and definitely the weirdest 5-color commander with Cody. Cody is a walking, talking book, and that's not even why it's a weird commander, but it's still very exciting. But today, the excitement continues, and I'm not just talking about that burrito place near me that finally is opening up today. So if you're also in the area, make sure you support local and check them out. And aside from my excitement of eating my very first Burritos burrito later, I am also excited about this mana rock that can win you the game. So how in the world does it do that? Well, let's jump into it. So the mana rock that I'm talking about in this episode is Strixhaven Stadium. So this must be where the students at Strixhaven play Quidditch. Sorry, I mean Mage Tower, not Quidditch. Definitely not Quidditch. Regardless of what sport they're playing, it's an artifact that costs 3 and you can tap it for a colorless and put a point counter on Strixhaven Stadium. It says whenever a creature deals combat damage to you, remove a point counter from Strixhaven Stadium. And whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to an opponent, put a point counter on Strixhaven Stadium. Then if it has 10 or more point counters on it, remove them all and that player loses the game. So there's actually a decent amount of things going on here, so let's break it down. First off, you can get counters in 2 different ways. You can tap this to add mana and you get a point counter on it. And then each time a creature you control deals combat damage to an opponent, you get 1 counter. Now you can also lose counters for each creature that hits you. But when you hit an opponent, if it's the 10th or over 10th counter, then you remove all those counters and that player that you hit loses the game. So this essentially can take out 1 opponent at a time and it resets. To my knowledge, you cannot take out all 3 players at once, but please let me know in the comments below if I'm incorrect on this. So from my understanding, you take out 1 player, then you've got to build up your counters again and take another one out and so on and so forth. There are actually quite a few decks out there that can do this really quickly. Again, obviously, one way that you can go about this is by hitting your opponents with a lot of creatures. Another way to get counters on this is by untapping it and tapping it again. And there are also some ways that you can add even more counters onto this. So this can be a fun yet effective include for quite a few decks out there. It's kind of like an alternative win condition that also just happens to be a mana rock. Now it's not an efficient mana rock, being a mana rock that costs 3 and just taps for 1, and it doesn't fix your colors, but it definitely makes up for that in the ability to win you the game. So let's talk about some commanders that might want to consider this card. One of the first commanders that came to my mind when I saw this mana rock was the Locust God. Though it's not in its bio, apparently the Locust God is just really good at Mage Tower. Who knew? Anyways, the Locust God is a 4/4 god with flying that says whenever you draw a card, create a 1/1 blue and red insect creature token with flying and haste. So the Locust God can pump out an absurd amount of hasty tokens with evasion. Just by casting 1 wheel and drawing 7 cards, you're pretty much already there. So obviously you can build up counters on Strixhaven Stadium over time, but most of the time you can probably just one-shot a player with that stadium. Even with 0 counters on it, you just need to tap it for a mana, you get a counter on it, and then you swing with 9 creatures, and then a player's gone. And that's basically just Locust God plus Wheel plus 1 other creature. So yeah, I think Strixhaven Stadium can definitely find a spot in this deck. Another commander that I immediately thought of was Edric, Spymaster of Trest. He has, whenever a creature deals combat damage to one of your opponents, its controller may draw a card. So a lot of Edric decks are all about getting low to the ground evasive creatures out quickly and swinging a ton. The more creatures you hit with, the more that you draw, and the more you draw into more evasive creatures, which you put out, and then you draw some more, and you see where this is going. Edric also can incentivize opponents to attack elsewhere. When a player is going to combat, they need to consider that, hey, if I attack the Edric player, I don't draw any cards, but if I attack someone else and I hit them, well, I'm going to draw a card. But again, with the number of small evasive creatures that you're going to be hitting with, Stadium could definitely work in this deck as well. And I just want to bring up that in a very similar way, Toski can work like that as well. Many Toski decks are built in a very similar way to Edric decks. Toski has this spell can't be countered, indestructible, attacks each turn if able, and whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, draw a card. So Toski is harder to deal with and doesn't incentivize opponents to attack elsewhere, but it could still work. Being able to build those counters over a couple of turns, or just even in one turn, is easily doable in this deck. And this next one might surprise you if you haven't seen my recent episode on Nylea. Nylea is my newest personal commander, and I built her in, let's just say, a different way than most. Nylea has creature spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. So I put a ton of creatures in the deck that cost 1 or less generic mana. It's kind of like a mono green storm aggro deck, which is a phrase that you usually don't hear. Regardless, this deck can get out an absurd amount of creatures very quickly, so yeah, winning with the stadium is a very real thing. But next up, let's move on to Marisi, Breaker of the Coil. It has your opponents can't cast spells during combat, and whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, goad each creature that player controls. So the build that I built around Marisi was somewhat similar to an Edric build, where again you have a bunch of low-to-the-ground evasive creatures. Now Marisi helps you with the stadium in multiple ways though. First off, not allowing your opponents to cast spells during combat can be huge. So once you're in combat, they're not going to be able to deal with your stadium. And then also when you hit them, you goad their creatures, which means they're not going to be attacking you. So it's going to be even more difficult for them to get counters off your stadium. So yeah, Marisi is definitely a commander that I could see considering this card. And the last kind of combat-centric commander that I'm going to bring up is Akim the Soaring Wind. It has whenever you create 1 or more tokens for the first time each turn, create a 1/1 white bird creature token with flying. And by paying 3 blue, red, white, creature tokens you control gain double strike until end of turn. So this commander can make you a good amount of tokens throughout the game, and then also, and more importantly, you can give all your creatures double strike until end of turn. And again, when your creature with double strike hits your opponent, you're getting 2 of those counters on your stadium. So it's going to take half as many hits to actually take out an opponent. Now when it comes to other types of commanders that get counters on things in different ways, the first one that came to mind was definitely Atraxa. Atraxa is a 4/4 Angel Horror with Flying, Vigilance, Death Touch, Lifelink, but most importantly she has, at the beginning of your end step, Proliferate. Basically, get an extra free counter on your stadium. Every turn. And again, that's on top of any counters that you're getting through combat damage. And of course, a lot of Atraxa decks run a lot of Proliferate effects. So you can get from 1 counter to 10 counters in no time. But again, keep in mind that even if you're already at 10 counters, you still need to hit an opponent to take them out. Though Atraxa can usually do that for you, having Flying. Next up, another Proliferate commander that might want to consider the stadium is Rolesk. Rolesk has when it dies, Proliferate, then Proliferate again. Basically, a lot of Rolesk decks revolve around creating clones of this commander. Basically, you get the clone, you get the ETB, and the LTB because it dies due to the legend rule. So again, with that LTB for every single clone, you proliferate twice. So again, with this kind of a commander, it's not going to be hard to get to 10 counters pretty quickly. Next up, let's talk about someone who wouldn't be caught dead playing Mage Tower, Yawgmoth Grand Physician. Now, Yawgmoth decks typically don't lean too heavily on his second ability. So like me, you might have forgotten that Yawgmoth actually has pay black, discard a card, proliferate. So if you've got enough cards in your hand and enough mana, you can get there. But again, you still gotta convince Yawgmoth to actually play Mage Tower, and I'm not sure if that's gonna happen. Anyways, next up we've got everyone's favorite Praetor, Vorinclex Monstrous Raider. Hey, that rhymed. Anyways, Vorinclex says if you would put 1 or more counters on a permanent or player, put twice that many of each of those kinds of counters on that permanent or player instead. Basically, it doubles up your counters. So yeah, basically just by having Vorinclex in play, you get twice as many counters on your stadium no matter how you're getting those counters. So if you tap it for mana, congratulations, you get 2 counters. You hit a player, congratulations, you get 2 counters. You proliferate, congratulations, okay, you get the picture. You can get there really quickly with this commander. And speaking of getting there quickly, the final commander that I want to bring up are partner commanders with Pier and Toothy. Pier has, if 1 or more counters we put on a permanent your team controls, that many plus 1 of each of those kinds of counters are put on that permanent instead. So whereas Vorinclex doubles, this one gets you 1 more. Now in most circumstances that's going to be the same thing, but sometimes it's not. Regardless, Pier and Toothy have a small advantage over Vorinclex in that they give you blue, and blue's got a lot of proliferate effects. But again, in my opinion, there are a lot of commanders out there that can consider this card. And even decks that aren't built around it might still consider it because it's just a fun card. It's kind of like a mini game in a way that is somehow just included in a mana rock. So yeah, that's pretty cool. But now I just want to highlight some types of cards that can work really well at the stadium, and of course I'm going to start off with Proliferate. So a card like Tezzeret's Gambit that draws you 2 cards and proliferates can be very good with this. But some proliferate effects that can be even more effective are repeatable ones like Evolution Sage, Flux Channeler, and Inexorable Tide. Evolution Sage says whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, proliferate. Flux Channeler says whenever you cast a non-creature spell, proliferate. Inexorable Tide proliferates whenever you cast any spell. So yeah, each of these can help you build up a lot of counters on your stadium very quickly. And there are actually some creatures that can help you proliferate in combat as well with Throwing Bird, Grateful Apparition, and Guild-Pact Informant. They each have flying, and when they deal combat damage to a player, proliferate. So essentially for just them hitting, you're getting 2 counters on your stadium. But finally, some other types of cards that you might want to consider as well are ones that actually untap your stadium. Because again, each time that you tap Strixhaven Stadium for mana, you put a point counter on Strixhaven Stadium. So cards like Clock of Omens, Unwinding Clock, and Seedborn Muse can be incredibly impactful. Clock of Omens says, tap 2 untapped artifacts you control, untap target artifact. In an artifact-heavy deck, you can easily untap your stadium multiple times in a turn for mana, as well as for getting point counters on it. And speaking of untapping multiple times, there's Unwinding Clock, which says, untap all artifacts you control during each other player's untapped step. So each trip around the table, you're getting 4 counters on your stadium. And of course, Seedborn Muse is very similar, but it untaps all your permanents during each other player's untapped step. But now it's time for me to give you my final thoughts on this card. I really like the design of this unique and fun mana rock. Again, it kind of just gives you a mini game while also producing you mana. And again, in that mini game, you've got multiple avenues to get to the requirement to win. Or by win, I mean take out a player. But again, in the right deck, you can easily take out multiple players with this and win the game. And being able to take out a player with a mana rock is a very Commander thing. So I'm excited to see what kinds of decks this ends up in. And with that, the show has come to a close, so it's my turn to hear from you. So in the comments below, let me know what your thoughts on this episode are, and as always, thank you again, and have a good one.